Welcome to Space to Lead, the podcast where leaders and teams come together to learn, grow, and thrive. Each episode brings fresh insights and real conversations with leaders and industry experts who are shaping the future of leadership. We explore strategies to build dynamic, engaging cultures, whether you're leading from the front or making an impact within your team. So take a deep breath, make some space, and let's lead together.
Welcome back to Space to Lead, the show where we peel back the layers of leadership, one honest conversation at a time. Today, I'm joined by Sarah Zaharia. Sarah is the Director of Communications at Acciona, and she's responsible for leading their North American communications strategy. I've had the privilege of witnessing Sarah's leadership journey up close for nearly 6 years, and her story is one of transition, courage, and that kind of quiet evolution that often goes unnoticed until suddenly it's quite undeniable. In this episode, we explore what it looks like to step into your power even when you don't realize you're holding back. We explore how language and confidence shape the rooms we walk into, and why the most meaningful transitions are rarely about the new job. They're about who you decide to become along the way. Sarah shares candidly about moving from the public to private sector, navigating seasons of intensity, maintaining relationships with integrity and grace, and the surprising moments that taught her she was far more than ready and far more capable than she ever gave herself credit for. It's a conversation about identity, self-belief, mentorship, community, and that very human experience of growing while you're still in motion. Let's dive in. Sarah, it is so great to have you on Space to Lead today.
Thanks for having me, David.
You know, I've really been looking forward to this conversation because we've known each other, gosh, I'm going to say 5-6 years now.
Yeah, I think almost 6.
6, yeah. Time, as we know, time flies. We basically went all through COVID, and you've had a few more changes yourself in that period as well. And I think that's what most excited me about this conversation is I know that you've gone through a lot of transition and had quite a journey as a leader. And I'd love to just create a little bit of space to learn a little bit more about that journey, just to see if there's any nuggets that we can share with our listeners.
Yeah, happy to. The past year has been a year of so much change. I'm in the private sector now for the first time in my career, which did feel like a massive transition and a bit of a risk. But when we first met, I think that the part I liked thinking about when I was going back on all the times and conversations we've had, whether it's been over the phone with me pacing around or in person, I think the first sort of bit of time that we spent together, I didn't even really realize that I was in a transition. And I think that can happen often when we're on the front, what you might consider the front end of your career. Women are particularly vulnerable to this, is that you see yourself not fully where others see you, or you self-limit in a way that you need to just recognize and get out of your own way on if you're going to take some bigger steps or reaches in your career. And one of my favorite questions that you asked me was, you know, if you think about your career as a book, what chapter in the book are you in? And I don't remember exactly what number I gave you, but it was quite early. I saw myself as pretty early in my journey, and then you just very matter-of-factly sort of reminded me of everything I'd done in my career to date. And when you hear it back, you realize how much you've done. And no matter what I was thinking about myself at the time, you know, felt like I had at the moment taking on something big that I was just starting. In many ways, I was one of the experts in my field. And it was such a shift to let go of the idea that I was actually further ahead than I thought. And in the months sort of after that conversation, as we kept working together, I sort of shook it off, and I occupied a different space in my work that was really, really cool, and I think pretty foundational into what came next.
I love to hear that. And it's something we see over and over again. And I've been guilty of it myself, these patterns that we hold on, whether it's a pattern of thought, a pattern of behavior, these beliefs or limiting beliefs. And it's interesting that you say, you sort of shook it off and let some of these things go. When did you first notice that shift? What did that look like?
I think the first thing I noticed was that I just was more declarative in how I talked about my work. So often you can put like these preambles on what you're saying, or even when you're writing, or like this is just my opinion, or here are my thoughts, rather than being factual and confident in what you have to say, and why you know that what you're saying is correct. Not to say that I know everything about everything, but I just started showing up in a more confident way. And then of course, when you do that, people meet you in that space by showing up differently. You're perceived differently. And from that, went through another huge change, maybe a year or two after that, where, I made the move into the private sector now, still in the infrastructure space, which I really love, and doing project work, but now on the private sector side. And what has been really interesting to do with this new sort of perspective and way I talk about myself and my work is that I'm now an expert on the government side of things to an audience that isn't as familiar or comfortable with the inner workings of government. So I think, if number one, I don't know if I would have even tried for this job had I not been in a more like comfortable, confident space. I don't think I would have been able to maintain it the way I have. When you're in a transition from whether it's one job for another, however it is, there's like a tremendous amount that you have to learn right in the beginning, no matter what. And that is like a time where you can really get in your own head. Like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I don't deserve this job. I don't know what I'm talking about. So I felt like I had this stronger foundation when I started here. And I'm really grateful for that. Because now I feel like what I can do for the company here and who knows where else after is really exciting to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. It really speaks to what a powerful opportunity exists in a transition, because transitions can be hard, particularly if you're leaving a role, leaving something where you're really comfortable. But it's such a great time to look at, how do I want to step into this new role, this new opportunity? And I love how you bring in this idea of language, and the choice of words that we use can either set us up in a really powerful way, or sometimes it can make us come across as apologetic, which makes us feel that we're not confident. So words and how we present ourselves is so, so powerful. I'm curious a little bit about the transition piece, because transitions are hard. And what I noticed and observed, and we've talked about this in the past, is that you went through this transition from the public sector to the private sector with confidence, as you self-described, but also with real grace.
Mm.
There was something really beautiful to watch as you transitioned, and not only built new relationships and new opportunities, but also nurtured those previous relationships. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, because I think that is something that can be quite challenging for people.
Oh yeah. Challenging, and it just couldn't be more important. And I don't think it matters what industry you're in, really. Like for me, working in the heavy civil infrastructure space is one example. But something that someone said to me as I was leaving my old job was the table is round. And when you're leaving a place, I think there's how you handle that says more about you than how you enter a new one. Not that that isn't important, but really, because it's tempting, perhaps, if not easier, to leave things maybe undone, or maybe you didn't have that one difficult conversation that you could have, so that the next time you encounter people, it's doesn't feel as smooth as it could be. And I spent a lot of time as I was like leaving and then going into my new role, spending actually quite a bit of time with, even in the month or two in my new role, spending time with old colleagues, just really making sure that everybody understood and that I was making clear to people that these relationships were incredibly important to me. And despite not being in the organization, I wanted to stay close to it. And I think that's just a good way to be as a person, but it was incredibly professionally useful for me too. You're on the other side of the table, but it is a round table, and there's not a lot of people in the industry, even across the country. And I think that's true in a lot of subsectors where people jump from company to company, private sector to public, and that you can't. Well, you can, but you shouldn't burn bridges when you transition. It just, in the long run, doesn't serve anybody. And the truth is, least of all yourself. As fun as it is to watch or read about people really burning the house down on an exit interview, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. I really have appreciated, even now, a year in, how great it is to still be close to those colleagues.
I'm smiling. It's on a podcast. People can't see me. But what's coming up for me as you share all of this. So, I identified that maybe I was holding myself back. So I wanted to change my behavior, step into my power. And then I'm stepping into a new role where I'm learning a new job and meeting all these new people. And then I'm also maintaining these old relationships. And the first thing that's coming to my mind is, wow, that takes a lot of energy to balance all those things.
It does, and you and I have talked about this too. It's also been like an incredibly stressful year in my personal life too. So the one thing on top of everything that I think is the best advice that I ever got or could give is that you can't pour from an empty cup. And that means a lot of different things in different situations. And again, I'll say, I do think women fall particularly victim to this, where you just give and give and give. For my work, carving out space for my own planning and thinking has been so valuable in my work. As a communications director with a territory as large as North America, being able to think clearly and strategically is essential to how I do my job effectively. So I have to give myself the space to do that. But on the other end of it, you're a whole person, right? There's more to you than your work. And sometimes your personal life is easy and sometimes it isn't. Making time for partner, your spouse, making time for yourself. For me, we've talked about this a lot. Like, my sanity is exercise. So you just have to put it in. You have to block your calendar. Don't prioritize yourself, because on the other side of that, you're going to do better for everybody in your life, family, but also your work. I know for sure I'm faster, more efficient, have more clarity if I've had time to, even if it's just coming in at 8:45 rather than 8, and having gotten to the gym in the morning. But yeah, the balance of it all is crazy hard to maintain, and all of it does take a lot of energy. But you know what I think too? Everybody talks about work-life balance, and work-life balance obviously is essential. But in my mind, it isn't something that necessarily comes out on the daily. I think work-life balance sometimes comes out over the course of months or even years. What I've noticed over the past year in this role is that there are some months that are horrifically busy. It's just unbelievably long. The travels is crazy, the hours are long, expectations are high. But on the other side of that, you really have to lean into the times that aren't. Like there were moments over the summer where I really got to have much lighter hours, a little bit more work from home, spent more time with my husband and kids, which felt really great. And then we had to recognize as a family that this cycle of balance isn't one that's going to be found day to day. It's going to be found over the course of the year. So that even just that conversation and recognizing that's really helped.
I think that's a really important thought concept that you just shared, because I think sometimes, particularly in the coaching world, there's this drive how you must fit this in every week. And while technically a coach shouldn't lead their clients, I see a lot of that where you have to fit in this time. And it's so interesting because I just had a conversation this week with an executive who's going through a really difficult time, to the stage of, do I continue doing this or not? And they made the decision that they think they can sustain it until February. So sort of what you described, this is going to be a busy period. It's a little bit crazy. I think I can do it till into the new year. And sometimes even just knowing that there's an end point can quiet some of the noise, can quiet some of the stress so you can kind of get through the present. So I love this idea of spreading work balance over a more lengthy period of time, recognizing that there's going to be peaks and valleys and being comfortable riding those peaks and valleys. That's beautiful.
I think psychologically that's so important, is knowing when you're going to be able to breathe and rest. It's as true for sports as it is for work stress. If you know what you're trying to reach for in a race, you build up the stamina and the capacity to know that you can go that hard, that fast. But, you have to rest at some point too, that nobody can continue at an accelerated pace forever. And if you are, I would wager that you're kidding yourself, that you're in this crazy heightened stress adrenaline state that isn't strategic, it isn't efficient, and you're probably pretty scattered. That's just the reality of living in a human body. That's how it works.
Yeah, so true, so true. And I have to say, when you talk about balance, whether it be over a period of time or fitting exercise into your routine, is one of the things I've really valued about some of our conversations is that you got me out there walking, around the seawall, through the Lonsdale Quay in North Vancouver. And those were good for me as a reminder as well, that it's important to kind of get out there moving. You may still be working, but doing things a little bit differently, because it's so critical to take care of ourselves.
And I think the other thing too, you have to decide if you want it. If you want those, I'm sure not unlike your other client, like there's a decision to be made. If you are going to be working at an extremely senior level, you have to be okay with sometimes being out of balance. And I think it's really healthy to have a conversation with yourself and the people close to you about whether or not you're in that same place now than you were a year, 2, 3, 5 ago. But like, is this still working for me? Is this still good for me, good for everyone? Am I still enjoying this? I'm not at all suggesting that, what people need to do is this whole quiet quitting phase. But I also think that there is a lot to be said for getting comfortable with the rung of the ladder that you're on. We tend to become really, really consumed with like always more, higher, higher, when really maybe you reach a certain point where you're feeling great. And this is just where you want to be, whether that's for a while or for the rest of your career. I wish there was more acceptance and space for people to feel really good about the place that they're at and not be so consumed with constantly reaching for more.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. I think accepting, it would be nice if people were more accepting of people getting to a place and then staying there, or also creating a big transition. So when you said rung of the ladder, I thought of a meme that I saw recently, or an article where someone had said they'd kept climbing those rungs, didn't really take time to pause and think about it, and then they realized they were up the wrong ladder. So
Yeah.
that's a big shift as well. Another interesting transition. So, gosh, I mean, there's so many things in what you've shared up until this point that we could dive into, because each piece of the journey that you've been through and each piece of the transition on its own has been a fairly big thing. Yet, as I said, you seem to have moved through this so gracefully and with a lot of intention. As you
I
think,
feel like that's been a bit of a duck on water situation, though. I love that it's seemed that way, but I'm definitely like a duck under the water, pedaling madly and feeling a little bit more panicked than maybe I've looked.
it certainly doesn't show. Well, of course, you're in communications. You're a beautiful communicator, and just how you carried yourself through all of these transitions. As you think about the past couple years and all the great work that you've done, professionally, with your family, all these elements that you brought in today, looking back, is there anything that you would do differently?
I think the thing I would do differently would have been to take the risk sooner. I was at like a celebration of life. It was maybe 3 years ago now, and listening to it was more his work colleagues, an incredible architect in Vancouver, and a number of his colleagues were there and talking about his career, and people were sharing about their own careers. And what I found myself admiring in how people were reflecting was about all these risks people took. Even if they were bumpy some of the time, the reality is things do tend to work out. And at my stage of career, and I'm 42, I I really hadn't taken a massive career risk the way I did. And I thought, maybe I could have done this sooner. I could have, and I suppose that's hindsight, right, in a nutshell. But I like the idea of being able to look back on what I've done professionally and not thinking, oh, I wish I just would have gone for it. You know, as I think there's a certain level of employability for people, and not to be foolish or anything, but I think we can all take a few more risks professionally. And I was very inspired by the way they talked about what they'd done and tried. And I hope I bring that into this next chapter of my work, that I'm unafraid.
Oh, beautiful. And I'm smiling because you said out loud you're 42, so I can now say that. So imagine how many cycles of risk taking you can go through because you've got a bit of runway.
Yeah, completely. And that's such an exciting thing to think about, that in certain in certain areas of work, where you hit your career peak really varies. But in my line of work, I've not really peaked yet. So it's just such an exciting thought that if I can be in this space professionally with good confidence and show up in the way that I want to and try to be unafraid with what I look at for the rest of my career, I think it's a lot more exciting than even I realized it could be when I was thinking about how life looked when you and I started talking.
I love that. I love that. If you were to look back from a different perspective, what surprised you most over the past couple of years as you look back?
I thought I was a confident person. And then when I think back with this lens now, I realize that I had a lot of space where I was being timid. And that's the thing about coaching that really blew my mind. Where when you think you've got really good self-awareness, which I thought was not bad, but having somebody really walking you through and inviting you to take a different point of view was and continues to be incredibly powerful. We get in ruts,
Yes, we all do. We all do. And to your point, when you talked about, climbing the ladder and all these different things that you're balancing as a leader, I think we all experience that where it almost seems indulgent to create a little bit of space or a little bit of time to do that reflective work that you're talking about. Yet it can be so impactful and so powerful.
Yeah. And not even all of that, but also what I'm most amazed by when I do make space for it. I'm not doing it weekly the way we've talked about, but I'm trying to at least do it monthly.
I'm taking notes. I'm taking notes.
I'm always amazed at the efficiency of it too. Like taking the time to step back and really think, I can then come to my work with this like organized frame of mind that I just find I can tear through work at a speed that is always just really practical and helpful once I've given myself some space.
Beautiful, beautiful. That could be a future conversation just to talk about what that looks like because there is an art to it. And I agree with you that as we exercise that muscle, sometimes those resets can be very efficient and very powerful. So you talked a couple times about I think the phrasing was particularly for women or women in these kind of roles. So as we think about bringing our conversation to a close, if we have any listeners out there, could be female leaders or otherwise, is there a tip or advice or a first step that you would recommend to kind of get them thinking about what's next for them?
The most powerful part of how I've navigated that has honestly been talking to other women. I've done this for friends as much as they've done it for me, is sometimes you just really need to be reminded how it's not a reach. So I think, people supporting people is incredibly powerful. But I won't deny that women supporting women, especially in positions of real leadership and power, is very, very, very impactful. And I have in my life been really lucky to have some very incredible, strong female leaders where I've worked. I'm trying to be mindful of that where I am now, to watch for other women around me who maybe need a little bit of encouragement or support, try to make space for that. But in terms of a tip, like a practical tip, it would be almost what I liked so much about the coaching period, which is that you have to just make time to talk about it with someone, whoever it is that like we're saying about being in a rut. If you don't give yourself a little bit of space to reflect out loud, and invite in that different perspective, it's very, very easy to become stuck.
Mm, I love that. I love that. As you shared that, the word that was coming up for me was community.
Mm.
We need to build community and be really intentional about those relationships, because there can be so much that can be garnered from creating time and space to cultivate those relationships. Yeah.
And I think inherently people want to help other people. It's powerful to do both. It's powerful to help, but it's also powerful to be helped and to not be afraid of saying, hey, I need a bit of advice, or would you mind a coffee? I'd like to talk something out. That I continue to be impressed and still surprised by the lengths that people will go to help someone out.
Sarah, as always, it's such a pleasure to connect and share stories. And I always am in awe as I watch you in your journey. And you've done it again today by just sort of sharing now that you're creating space to give back and support other leaders. I love that. Thank you so much for making the time for the space for this conversation today.
My pleasure. Thanks, David.
What I love about conversations with Sarah is the blend of honesty, reflection, and grounded wisdom she brings to her leadership journey. Today, she reminded us that transitions aren't just professional milestones. They're personal invitations. Invitations to shed old beliefs, to use our voice with more confidence, to recognize when we're holding ourselves back, and to step into our next chapter with intention rather than apology. She also offered a powerful reminder: none of us grow alone. Whether we're asking for help, offering support, nurturing relationships, or building community one conversation at a time, leadership is at its core relational. My hope is that something in Sarah's story nudged you to pause, to reflect, or to consider the possibility that maybe you're further ahead in your own journey than you think. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Space to Lead. If this conversation resonated, please share it with someone who might need the encouragement. And as always, keep creating the space that you need for clarity, for courage, and for what comes next. Follow us on your favorite podcast provider so you don't miss an episode, and we will see you next time.